Keanu Reeves had always been discreet in his daily routines. Every night, at the same hour, he stopped by a small 24-hour market to pick up something simple. But on this particular night, something caught his attention. Across the checkout, an elderly employee was finishing her shift. She held a small bag tightly as she stepped out through the side door. He had noticed her before, always leaving late, always exhausted. But tonight, something felt different. Her weary eyes, hurried steps, and the way she clutched the bag as if it were a treasure made Keanu pause. As Keanu watched her disappear around the corner, a tightness grew in his chest. He couldn't explain why, but something compelled him to follow. What he was about to witness would touch his heart in ways he never expected. But before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another special story just for you. Los Angeles at night has a rhythm of its own. The chaos of the day, blaring horns, hurried footsteps, and endless chatter, fades into a quieter, almost eerie stillness. The occasional siren wails in the distance, and lone footsteps echo against the pavement. Despite being a Hollywood icon, Keanu Reeves never cared much for the glitz and glamour. He had always found comfort in life's quieter moments, the simple routines that kept him grounded beyond the Hollywood spotlight. One of those rituals was his late-night visit to a small 24-hour market, a habit that gave him a fleeting sense of normalcy. He would slip in unnoticed, grab some fruit, a bottle of water, maybe a quick snack. Nothing fancy, just the basics. He enjoyed the anonymity, the feeling of being just another person moving through the city's quiet streets. But tonight, something felt different. There was an employee he had seen many times before, an older woman with graying hair, slightly crooked glasses, and a face marked by exhaustion. She wore a simple uniform and spent most of her shift stocking shelves or mopping the floor, working tirelessly through the night. Keanu had never given her much thought, not out of indifference, but because she had become part of the background. Always there, always working, quiet and unassuming. But tonight was different. As he stepped into the store, something about her caught his attention. She held a small plastic bag in her hands, moving slower than usual. Her shoulders sagged, not just from exhaustion, but from a deeper, invisible weight. Her steps were sluggish, almost as if she were carrying more than just the bag in her hands. Then, without a word, she slipped through the side door and disappeared into the night. Keanu paid for his groceries as he always did. But as he stepped outside, he couldn't shake the image of the elderly woman walking alone into the darkness. Something about this night felt different, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he found himself unable to look away. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that woman carried a burden far heavier than the plastic bag in her hands. All day, Keanu had tried to shake the lingering feeling from the night before. He had seen that elderly woman countless times at the market, yet it had never crossed his mind to wonder about her life beyond those walls. Where did she go after her shift? What did her world look like outside of this store? Now, that thought refused to leave him. That night, he returned to the market at his usual time. And there she was again. But this time, he truly saw her. She moved through her tasks as always, restocking shelves with slow, mechanical motions, sweeping the floor with her head slightly bowed. There was something about her posture, the quiet way she carried herself, that made him pause. But now, he noticed the small details. The way she let out a quiet sigh when she thought no one was watching. The way her shoulders slumped just a little more as the night wore on. Then, midnight struck. She picked up her small plastic bag, offered a brief farewell to the cashier, and stepped out through the side door. Keanu moved toward the exit, but this time, he didn't head home. He hesitated. He watched. She wore a green blouse, slightly worn but neatly kept. The fabric draped loosely over her thin frame, a body weighed down by years of exhaustion. And this time, he noticed something he hadn't the night before. She didn't board a bus. She didn't hail a cab. She didn't even glance around for a car. She simply started walking. Keanu stood on the sidewalk, watching as she disappeared into the night. There was something about her steps, slow, not in the carefree way of someone enjoying a quiet evening, but in the weary, deliberate manner of someone carrying a weight far heavier than exhaustion. She clutched the plastic bag tightly, as if holding onto something precious. He expected her to stop at a bus stop, wave down a taxi, or turn toward a parked car. But she never did. She just kept walking. And in that moment, Keanu made a decision without thinking. He started following her. He kept his distance, careful not to startle her. He didn't fully understand why he was doing this, only that he couldn't look away. She moved with quiet determination, as if heading somewhere specific. Around them, the city still buzzed, bars with neon signs, late-night stores, the hum of traffic in the distance. Streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. But as she walked, the surroundings began to shift. The wide, busy avenues gave way to narrower, dimly lit streets. The bright storefronts faded into worn-down buildings, their edges softened by time and neglect. The distant hum of traffic grew quieter, until all that remained was the steady rhythm of her footsteps against the pavement. A tightness crept into Keanu's chest. This woman wasn't heading home. She was going somewhere else, somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere he couldn't yet understand. And with each step she took, an unsettling feeling settled deeper inside him. Something was very, very wrong. Keeping his distance, Keanu followed as she moved through the darkened streets. But the farther she walked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just exhaustion or routine. He kept expecting her to stop, to wait for a bus, or for a car to pull up and take her away. But that never happened. She just kept walking. And as she did, the world around her began to shift. The bright, bustling streets of the city center gradually gave way to dimly lit roads. Streetlights grew fewer and farther between, casting long, uneven shadows on the pavement. Sleek, modern buildings disappeared, replaced by aging structures with peeling paint and crumbling facades, worn down by time. The city's late-night energy slowly faded into silence. Only a few lone figures remained, drifting along the sidewalks. The distant hum of traffic grew fainter until the only sound left was the steady rhythm of the woman's footsteps against the pavement. Keanu followed at a careful distance, ensuring she never noticed him. She clutched the plastic bag tightly against her chest, as if shielding something valuable. Her exhaustion was evident, yet she never paused to rest. With every block she passed, a growing unease settled in Keanu's chest. He didn't know what he expected to find, but something deep inside told him this was no ordinary walk home. This wasn't just a commute. This wasn't just a routine walk, it was survival. After nearly 40 minutes of walking, the woman finally came to a stop. Keeping to the shadows, Keanu watched as she approached a small, run-down trailer parked beside an empty lot. The metal exterior was rusted in spots, worn down by years of neglect. A single, dim light flickered from inside. She paused at the door, taking a deep breath before slowly pushing it open and stepping inside. Keanu moved closer, careful not to make a sound. Stopping just a few feet away, he peered through the small window. What he saw made his stomach drop. Inside the trailer, 2 small children lay curled up on a thin mattress on the floor. The space was cramped and nearly empty, save for a few worn-out blankets and a small rickety table pushed against the wall. The elderly woman reached into her plastic bag and pulled out a single piece of bread and a small container of thin soup. At the sight of food, the children immediately sat up, their eyes filled with hunger and relief. The woman offered them a gentle smile, masking the deep exhaustion in her face, and carefully divided the meal into smaller portions. There was no luxury, no abundance, just barely enough to keep them from going to bed hungry. At least for tonight. And in that moment, Keanu understood. She wasn't simply heading home after a long shift. She was fighting, every single day, to keep these children alive. A lump formed in Keanu's throat. He had always known there was suffering in the world, but seeing it this close, right in front of him, was different. It was real. It was undeniable. And he knew, without hesitation, that he couldn't just walk away. Keanu stood in the darkness, his eyes fixed on the trailer's window. Inside, the elderly woman sat beside the children, smiling gently as if everything was okay. But Keanu saw the truth behind that smile. He noticed the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint tremble in her fingers as she held the spoon, the way she quietly watched the children eat, never taking a bite herself. She wasn't just skipping a meal. She was sacrificing her own hunger so they could have something, anything. A lump formed in Keanu's throat. It was a quiet moment, without words, yet overflowing with meaning. This woman spent long hours working in a grocery store, cleaning, stocking shelves, always greeting customers with a polite smile. And yet, after all that, she came home to a reality where there simply wasn't enough food for everyone. Keanu had always been aware of inequality. He had donated to countless charities, supported numerous causes, and understood that millions struggled to survive every day. But this was different. This wasn't a documentary, a news report, or a statistic. This was real. The woman he saw every night at the market, the one so many customers overlooked, was out here, sacrificing her own meal just so two small children wouldn't go to bed hungry. And no one knew. No one saw. Keanu took a few steps back from the trailer, inhaling deeply. The cold night air felt heavier now. Running a hand over his face, he tried to process what he had just witnessed. That night he went home, but sleep never came. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a weight pressing against his chest that he couldn't shake. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that single piece of bread being carefully divided. He saw the woman holding back her tears, pretending to be satisfied just by watching her grandchildren eat. The image lingered in his mind, refusing to fade. Keanu had always believed that a single act of kindness could change someone's life. But this was bigger than just buying her a meal. This wasn't about one dinner. This was about a cruel reality that should never exist. And he knew he couldn't just walk away. He had to do something. Keanu lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. No matter how much he tried to push it aside, he knew deep down, he couldn't ignore what he had seen. He had to act. And he had to act soon. The next morning, he woke with a sense of urgency. The images from the night before stayed with him, the elderly woman, the small trailer, the hungry children. For years, he had helped through charities and donations. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't a distant issue. It was right in front of him. And he needed to understand it. So instead of following his usual routine, Keanu found himself back at the 24-hour market that afternoon. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the aisles. The woman, Donna Marta, as he had overheard the cashier call her, wasn't on shift yet. But he wasn't there just to see her. He was there for answers. Keanu approached the front counter, where the store manager was busy checking inventory. "Excuse me," Keanu said, his voice calm yet firm. "I was wondering if I could ask you something about one of your employees." The manager looked up, momentarily caught off guard. He recognized Keanu instantly but maintained his professionalism. "Of course, Mr. Reeves. How can I help you?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "I wanted to ask about Donna Marta. She's been working here for a long time, hasn't she?" The manager hesitated for a brief moment before nodding. "That's very kind of you," she said, adjusting the bag in her hands. "I do see you around, too, but I never wanted to disturb you." "You wouldn't have," Keanu reassured her. "But I get it. I like my quiet time, too." She offered a small smile, though there was a weariness behind it, as if she wasn't used to people taking the time to talk to her. Keanu glanced at the bag in her hands, hesitating for a moment before speaking again. He kept his tone casual, careful not to intrude. "You work so late. That must be exhausting." Dona Marta exhaled softly. "It is," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you do what you have to do, don't you?" Keanu nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "Yeah, I guess we all do." A brief pause. The city buzzed faintly in the distance, but in that moment it was just the two of them standing under the dim glow of the streetlight. Dona Marta adjusted her bag again, shifting slightly as if she was about to leave. Keanu didn't want to pressure her, but something inside told him he couldn't just let her walk away. So he chose his words carefully. "I know I don't know much about you," he said gently. "But if you ever need anything, sometimes it helps to have someone looking out for you." Dona Marta stiffened slightly. For a moment, Keanu worried he had overstepped. But then she let out a quiet, almost tired chuckle. "That's kind of you, Keanu." Her voice was warm but guarded, as if she wasn't used to kindness with no strings attached. She looked up at him one last time before giving a small nod. "It was nice talking to you, but I should get home." Keanu didn't try to stop her. He simply nodded back. "Have a good night, Dona Marta." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the dark streets. Keanu stood there for a moment, watching her go, his chest heavy with thoughts. He hadn't pushed her, hadn't asked too much. But now she knew. She knew someone had noticed her. And somehow, Keanu knew this wasn't the last time they would talk. He exhaled, watching as Dona Marta disappeared into the night. He hadn't made any grand gestures, but he had opened a door. And deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. That night, Keanu lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His conversation with Dona Marta played over and over in his mind. Her tired smile, the way she clutched that small plastic bag, the quiet exhaustion in her voice when she said she simply did what she had to do. She had been polite, but he could tell she didn't expect anyone to help her. She had carried the weight alone for so long that she had stopped hoping for anything different. Keanu had met countless people in his lifetime. Actors, directors, celebrities, politicians. He had seen fame, wealth, and luxury. But few had humbled him the way she did. Because Dona Marta wasn't asking for help. She wasn't looking for sympathy. She was just surviving. And that was what made Keanu's decision so easy. He wasn't going to walk away. The next morning, he took action. But he didn't want to simply hand her money. He had seen too many temporary solutions. Cash that ran out, donations that didn't fix the real problem. Dona Marta didn't just need a paycheck. She needed stability. She needed a home. And so, Keanu quietly began making arrangements. He spent the day reaching out to people he trusted, real estate agents, community organizers, charity workers. He didn't want anything extravagant or flashy. He wanted something real, something that felt like home. After hours of searching, he found it. A small house, modest but fully furnished. A safe neighborhood, close to schools, where the children could grow up without worry. A place where Dona Marta wouldn't have to walk miles after a long shift. A place where she could finally breathe. Keanu handled everything quietly. He made sure the house was fully paid off, that the utilities would be covered for as long as necessary. He even arranged a small trust fund, ensuring she would never have to worry about putting food on the table again. No publicity. No cameras. No headlines. Just a man who had seen someone struggling and refused to look away. That night, Keanu returned to the market. Dona Marta was just finishing her shift when he arrived, stepping out into the cold night air with her usual small plastic bag in hand. She saw him standing there and offered a tired but sincere smile. "Keanu, what a surprise!" He smiled back. "Hey, Dona Marta, got a minute?" She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I don't want to overwhelm you," he said gently, "but I know life has been hard, and I want to help." Her smile faltered slightly, replaced by hesitation. "Keanu, He handed her the envelope. "Just open it," he encouraged softly. With slightly trembling hands, she unfolded the paper inside. Her breath caught. Her eyes scanned the words again and again, as if trying to convince herself it was real. Tears welled up instantly. She covered her mouth, her whole body shaking. This is for me?" she whispered. Keanu nodded. "Now you have a home, Dona Marta. A real home." For a long moment she stood frozen, her frail hands gripping the paper, overcome with emotion. Then, suddenly, she broke into quiet sobs, her entire body trembling with gratitude. Keanu stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone anymore." DOA plus or minus a Marta looked up at him, eyes glistening. And for the first time since he had met her, she looked like she truly believed it. The next day, Keanu went to see the house with her and the children. The moment the kids stepped inside, they ran through the rooms laughing, touching the walls, jumping on the beds as if they couldn't believe it was real. DOA plus or minus a Marta stood at the door, hands over her chest, looking around in disbelief. She turned to Keanu, her eyes still red from crying. "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu smiled. "You don't have to." Because he hadn't done it for gratitude. He had done it because it was right. Because sometimes the greatest battles are fought in silence. And because when you finally see those who are invisible to the world, you have the power to change everything. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.